Hi everybody, my name is Korai, and here's my presentation on Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, which I will refer to from this point on as Brothers, and why I think this game demonstrates the potential of video games as an art form. So first, what is this game about? Brothers is a game about two brothers, of course, one older than the other, who seek out water from the Tree of Life for a cure for their father, the only parent they have left. They have to work together to make their way past a progression of obstacles and enemies organically placed within a fantasy setting. The single player gameplay works by having each brother controlled by a different thumbstick on the same controller, and the player can have a brother interact with their environment by pushing the trigger that corresponds to the same side of the controller. The game can also be played by two players, where each player takes control of one of the brothers. So let's first look at whether this game can be considered an art form through the arguments made by Aaron Smutt in Our Video Games Art and the readings from Arthur Danto. Then I plan to expand on a point that Smuts makes briefly but doesn't really flesh out very much, using this idea to frame why I think that the claims that Roger Ebert makes that games can never be art are kind of made in bad faith. Finally, I will try to show how games as a medium are able to explore and convey artistic expression in a way that no other medium can, which places video games alongside other great art forms in terms of potential, and we will be using Brothers as an example of this. So let's just first look at whether this game has the potential to be an art form at all. Smut tries to show that most games can broadly be considered art by showing how characteristics of games are similar to previously established art forms. For example, games share many similarities to movies and literature in the way that they often use a narrative to convey a story. Many of the ways in which animation can be made through computer-generated graphics and 3D modeling are shared with video games. In addition, there has recently been an emergence of museum exhibits and educational art programs dedicated to games, showing how the world at large has started to view games as similar to art. All of these aspects suggest that games are art, but they don't conclusively show us the specific game is art and not something else that a game can be. As Smut points out, not all games may meet the criteria of an art form. Some games, such as League of Legends, Hearthstone, Fortnite, etc., I think may be more accurately classified as sports, since they serve an exclusively competitive purpose, even if they have been made in a similar way to other games or share some characteristics with them. Some games that are art forms. The problem I see is that using this criteria gets dubious when we consider games like StarCraft, which has a competitive aspect that is considered an esport and that exists directly alongside a narrative campaign within the single player part of the game. Little side note about StarCraft, it was actually the very first major esport. So is StarCraft art? Is it a sport? Can it be both, like some argue for figure skating or chess? Do you then classify the different modes of the game separately and the whole as something different entirely? These are questions we can't get into here, but they show why it is sometimes difficult to distinguish whether a specific game is an art form from just this criteria, though we will see that Smut is kind of able to make up for this later. So to see whether Brothers is an artwork, I think we need to approach it from a more basic level. We can use Arthur Danto's idea that art has to be about something, as this allows us to identify whether we should be considering this game an art form separately from the idea that all games are art. Just because the game has a setting and backstory to inform the gameplay doesn't necessarily mean it's art, as games like League of Legends have backstories for all the characters set in a fantasy world. And that game would be more accurately described as a sport from this point of view. Something that makes it distinct from a game like League is that you play through a clear narrative progression in Brothers rather than within an arena that is dedicated to player versus player competition. What sets the narrative of Brothers apart from League is the progression of the story through the gameplay. The brothers prevent a suicide, reunite a pair of trolls, and save a seemingly innocent girl from a tribe. This gives the game a plot structure and clear narrative elements and themes that are conveyed through the elements that occur, most prominent of which is the idea that obstacles which would be impenetrable to an individual can be overcome by working together, using individual strengths to make up for the weaknesses of a partner and creating a formidable whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. Each of the brothers are able to do things the other can't. The younger brother can't swim, but the older brother can, and he's also bigger and stronger, which allows him to boost his younger brother up to high places and to pull levers the younger brother can't. Whereas the younger brother, being smaller, can fit into tight spaces the elder brother can't get to. As Smut points out, if you think a similar narrative depicting these sorts of themes within a video or a book should be considered art, then you should accept this game as a piece of art too. Another part of Danto's classification for art can also be seen here, as Brothers also can be said to exist within an art world that contextualizes it within the greater discussion and history of games and other art. The game has been given near universal acclaim, with comparisons to games like Ico, Journey, and Fable. Much praise has been given for its ability to convey narrative and meaning through visual storytelling and gameplay, the latter of which is, I think, particularly interesting and what we will soon get into. Having established that we have a genuine piece of art here, I can now get into why I think games in general are worthy of consideration. If we recall Ebert's criticism, it boils down to this, quote, "No one in or out of the field has ever been able to cite a game worthy of comparison with the great poets, filmmakers, novelists, and poets." Whether he was making some kind of joke by putting poets twice is beyond me, but I do know that this criticism comes exclusively from a standpoint that doesn't see games as worthy of consideration, not because they haven't achieved anything noteworthy artistically. Ebert chose not to engage with what games have to offer at all, and so only gives proof of his point by maintaining his own ignorance. If, as Ebert himself writes, a movie is great to him because of its capacity to be greatly moving, then his error is that he simply isn't willing to honestly engage with a game in order to allow it to have that level of an effect. Brothers is a game that has been celebrated for doing just that for many people, which is what I will now examine. To explain this, let's back up a bit to a point that Smut makes. Quote, "Game designers have used the medium to tackle previously unsolvable artistic problems facing film and literature," end quote. Though he doesn't elaborate on this, he's definitely right to say this, because video games have something that the other two mediums lack, the ability to interact with and manipulate the world within the narrative through the gameplay, something I think of as a sort of interactive, tactile experience that sets games apart from something like the purely passive visual experience of watching a movie. This means that game developers don't just have visual and audio mediums with which to convey meaning to their audience, but a tangible one as well. I would argue that games allow for a sense of immersion that is distinct from other mediums because of this tangibility. The physical control we have over our characters allows us to feel the tension of the gameplay, giving us a real physical experience that acts as a surrogate for the running, jumping, dodging, pushing, pulling, etc. that is done by the characters we control. By having the physical experience alongside the visual experience of what's happening on screen, we psychologically associate what we're feeling with the physical acts we're seeing. This allows for a deep sense of immersion while playing games, and while we might not feel like we're literally doing what the characters are doing, we are still given physical feedback that brings a sense of satisfaction separate from the visual and audio stimulation we're experiencing. This immersion has been recognized and enhanced by game and console developers alike, with companies like Nintendo incorporating what they call HD Rumble into their Joy-Con controllers for the Nintendo Switch, which can be programmed by game developers to vibrate at a wide range of speeds to help enhance the immersive experience of key moments. This is where Brothers comes in. Now, fair warning, I'm going to spoil the major emotional payoff of this game, and is worth experiencing for yourself if you so desire. So, just in case you want to give it a try, it's only 2 hours. Give it a shot if you feel like it. It's on Steam. But with that out of the way, here's how Brothers uses the tangible medium experience to convey meaning through its gameplay. As mentioned earlier, the single-player gameplay works by having each brother controlled by a different thumbstick on the controller, and the player can have a brother interact with their environment by pushing the trigger that corresponds to the same side of the controller. In multiplayer, there are of course two players using separate controllers, but the real impact of Brothers gameplay is experienced by one player with a single controller. Now, near the end of the game, the brothers rescue a girl. She joins them, eventually leading them into a cave where she reveals that she is actually a giant spider. The brothers are able to defeat her, but not before the older brother is wounded. He insists the younger brother retrieve the water from the Tree of Life while he waits at the bottom. But when the younger brother comes back, he finds his older brother already dead. After burying his brother, the younger finds himself at the edge of a lake, which he needs to cross to get home. But as we know, he is unable to swim and is afraid of the water. The player may struggle to figure out what to do at this point, knowing that the younger brother can't swim. The key moment here comes when you try to enter the water for lack of anything else to do, only to find that, after some resistance, the younger brother, eventually, inspired by the spirit of his dead mother and his brother's sacrifice, is now able to struggle to swim with the use of the trigger that was previously used by the older brother. The emotional impact of this experience can't be understated. By using the method of interacting with the world that was previously used for the older brother, we implicitly understand the evolution of the younger brother as a character. His struggle to overcome alone what he once had to rely on his brother for is something that we get to experience physically. In doing so, the game conveys meaning to the player in a way no other medium can, by physically allowing them to experience the way in which a character grows as a result of loss. This greatly deepens the themes of the game, conveying the struggle of overcoming obstacles to ensure the sacrifice of a loved one wasn't in vain. This shows how games of a medium have so much potential that has yet to be explored. While they are still in their infancy and have a long way to go to get to the level of recognition of most other respected art forms, I think they really are on their way to becoming just as interesting as any of them.